All right. So my name is Larry, and I'm one of the interns here at the church. And if you are new to the village, like we mentioned earlier, we're especially glad that you are here to join us. I really feel that our church is going through an exciting time. If you are new, you might not be familiar, but in the past summer or so, we had summer Bible camp, and we had record turnouts. It's like a kids event that we have, and recently we've been starting some community groups, and those things are rocking. And most recently, some of you guys who have been coming, you might not even know, we've been brainstorming what would it look like to start a youth group for teenagers. And so we haven't started anything officially, but it's in the works, and we're talking about it. So I think it's pretty exciting, some of the things that we're doing. Last week, we celebrated our 6th year anniversary. So our church has been around for 6 years, and we had some baptisms. And it's just been amazing to see how much our church has changed. I've only been here for a little over a year, and even in this past year, it's been amazing to see how much our church has changed. So God is doing some cool things, and if you are new, we'd love to have you join us. So I want to extend that welcome to you, whoever you are. If you have your Bibles, you can take them out. We'll turn to Luke chapter 22. If you want to look at the screen, we'll have them on the screen as well. We'll be looking at Luke 22. If you're going to use a pew Bible, the one in front of you, you can flip to page 754. That's 754. Recently, we've been going through the sermon series on Romans 8, but we're going to take a quick break from that this week, and we'll talk about this passage in Luke 22. And this is something that I read personally on my own, in my own quiet times with God, and I just read this, and it just really struck me. So let's read it together. If you're ready, this is Luke chapter 22. We're going to go to verse 31, starting from verse 31. It says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. Peter said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death. Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny 3 times that you know me. I'm going to pray real quick before we start. Father, I thank you for this time. Thank you for another chance to gather, another chance to wake up and to experience a new day and to meet with other people and to learn from your word and to worship. God, I pray that we would never take these things for granted, that there are billions around the world who don't have these opportunities. And God, I pray for this time, as you open up your word for us, I pray that we would take something away from this time and we would apply it to our hearts, and that we would live our lives more boldly, more accurately, more lovingly as a result. I pray that, God, if there's any of us in this room who are feeling down and out for some reason, if we're feeling like we don't deserve you for some reason, we don't understand you for some reason, I pray that you would meet us at this time. And I pray this on your son's name. Amen. So just to give you some context for this passage, this is near the end of Luke, right? And Luke is one of the accounts we have of Jesus' life, and it's toward the end of Jesus' life here on earth. And up to this point, the disciples had been following Jesus around for about 3 years. And there's a character in this passage, Simon. You can also call him Peter. He was a fisherman that Jesus called to follow him, and he's been following him for about 3 years. And as far as we know, Peter is one of the closest people to Jesus ever, that ever walked on this earth. And there was this, if you're familiar with the Bible, there's this passage where Peter and Jesus, they have this intimate experience on the Sea of Galilee. Jesus was walking on the water, and Peter goes, is that you? If that's you, call me out onto the water, I'll walk too. And then Jesus calls him out, and then he starts to walk, and he starts to sink, and then Jesus grabs him by the hand, and it's a really awesome encounter he had with Jesus. And it was also, as far as we know, Peter is the first person who recognized Jesus was the Messiah. There was this conversation where Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, and that's the first account we have of somebody declaring that, a human being declaring that to Jesus. So Peter was one of Jesus' closest disciples. And again, chapter 22 is the end of Luke, and the chapter opens stating that the Passover was near. And so if you're familiar with the timeline of Jesus' life, Passover was Thursday, and then spoiler alert, okay, Jesus dies on Friday, okay? So this is really close to when Jesus is about to die. The disciples, they don't know that yet, but this is the last week that Jesus is on earth. Okay? And then we're going to read a few random snippets throughout the chapter. We're starting from verse 3. It says, Satan entered into Judas, called Iscariot. Okay? And this is when Judas turns to the dark side. Okay? This is when Judas turns to the dark side, and he then goes and conspires with some people, and he plots to take down Jesus. And then we'll talk about Judas in a little bit, but we'll keep that in mind. We'll skip down to verse 15. They're having this Passover meal in verse 15, and Jesus says, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And then they have the Passover meal, and then starting from verse 21, he says, But behold, the hand of him who betrays me is with me on the table. For the Son of Man goes as it has been determined, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. And they began to question one another, which of them it could be who was going to do this. So Jesus is having this last meal on earth, right? He knows it's his last meal. He says so. I've desired to eat this with you before I suffer. I won't eat of it again until the kingdom of God. So he knows this is his last meal. And then he says to his disciples, these are his closest friends, right? He says, one of you will betray me. Right? Let's try to imagine this scenario. What if you were one of these disciples? You followed him around for 3 years, and you hear that. You know, in our modern day context, you can think of it as like, what if you played for the Ravens? Okay, the Baltimore Ravens, and let's say you're having this awesome season. Things are ridiculous, and you make it to the playoffs, and the atmosphere is just wild, and you make it to the AFC Championship game, and you're playing the Steelers. Okay, and it's things are really awesome right now. And the coach, John Harbaugh, he calls this meeting, and he goes, you know what? Something's happening. I just got news. One of us in this room right now is talking with the Steelers head coach, and he's actually leaking our play calls. And not only that, but he plans on signing a contract with them next year. Okay, that's how the atmosphere must have been a little bit at the Last Supper when Jesus breaks this news to him. One of you guys, even though you've been following me around for 3 years, we've been having an awesome ride, right? One of you guys is going to betray me. And no doubt, right, there's going to be this murmur, if not out loud, at least in their minds, that goes across the room. Who is it? Who is it? Is it me? And then a few verses down, in verse 31, we get our passage. Jesus directs his attention to Peter. Okay, so Peter, he has a spotlight now, okay? And Jesus says to Peter, Simon, Simon, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. Now there's a lot of meat right here, but I just want to talk about this first line. Satan demanded to have you. In other words, Satan is out to get you. Satan has asked for you. Now, in the Greek, if you're looking at a Pew Bible, you can actually see a little footnote letter, and it tells you to go down. And most of the time, I ignore these things. But I found this kind of interesting because it says that in the Greek, this word you is plural. And then it says in verse 32, all of those instances of you is singular. And if you're not a grammar nerd, that might not make any sense to you. But essentially, Jesus is saying Satan demanded to have you all, that he might sift you all like wheat. In other words, Satan isn't just asking for Peter, he's asking for all of the disciples. Satan is asking for all of the disciples. And no, this is the same Satan. Earlier in this chapter, we read how Satan entered into Judas, right? Satan entered into Judas, and now Satan wants to, you can think of it, enter into everybody else. And there's a big reality that we need to come to grips with here, and that is that if you are a follower of Jesus, there's a really good chance that Satan is after you. If you are a follower of Jesus, there's a good chance that Satan has demanded for you. And we see that across the Bible, that Satan is constantly waging a war against the followers of Jesus. There's this great cosmic war, and unlike human wars, oftentimes we fight for oil or maybe for political freedom or for land. Satan is fighting for human souls. And he is very much on the move. And one of Satan's greatest tactics is that he wants to convince us that we're living in peace. That's one of Satan's tactics. He wants to convince us that we're living in peace. And by and large, Satan has convinced America that we are in peace, that there is no war, there is no urgency, that all that matters is just being comfortable or being safe or just to be liked. And millions of people are falling for this. There are those out there, maybe people in this room even, there are those out there who don't like the idea of Satan. Right? You prefer to, you like the Bible because it talks about God and his love, but when it talks about Satan, you just kind of, maybe you stay away from those passages because it seems too negative. In fact, in 2013, the Harris poll did a study and showed that while 74% of U.S. adults believe in God, only 58% believe in the devil. And the reality is that Satan actually loves it when people don't believe in him. Satan loves it when people don't believe in him because he can mess with people, and then what people do is they don't attribute it to him. They attribute it to bad luck, or they attribute it to maybe themselves, or maybe they attribute it to mean people. And essentially, Satan uses other people as a cover, as a scapegoat to do his work. And I'm not just talking about people who don't believe in Satan. Sometimes, I fall in this too. I'm a Christian, and I would say I believe in the Bible and I believe in Satan. But sometimes I tend to fall into this, and we live as if Satan doesn't do very much. We live as if he just sits around and he's bored and he has nothing to do. And that's actually the exact opposite of what he does. Peter, he later writes a book in the Bible, and in this book, Peter says that Satan is like a lion, and he's just waiting for somebody to devour. And that's what Satan is. And we should stay positive, that is true, but we can't just stay positive because there is something going on. We have to come to grips with that. We cannot ignore this reality. And I think the main reason why we need to be aware of the existence of Satan is so that we can be aware of our need for God. The main reason we need to be aware of the existence of Satan is so that we can be aware of our need for God. Because if all of our problems are quote-unquote normal problems, if all our problems are quote-unquote normal problems, then we can get to the point where we feel like we can solve everything on our own. We feel like, I got the means, I got the resources, I got the will to fix everything on my own. I don't need outside help. But the moment we realize we have problems that are bigger than ourselves, we have problems that maybe there's this external force who is a powerful being and he wants to take me down, he demands from me, then we might be willing to cry out for help. And so we cry out for God. So maybe for some of us, we need to have a greater awareness of Satan, but maybe for others of us, maybe I want to say we have too great of an awareness for Satan. That's the other side of the spectrum. And I say that because in this passage, Jesus clearly demonstrates his superiority over Satan. In verse 32, Jesus says, "But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers." Jesus says that he is interceding on Peter's behalf. He is praying for Peter. It seems like Jesus isn't just praying. He already assumes that his prayer is being answered, because he doesn't say, "If you turn again, strengthen your brothers." He says, "When you have turned again, strengthen your brothers." Right? In that distinction between that word "if" and that word "when," that's key, because when Jesus intercedes for us, it's a done deal. Jesus knows it's a done deal. He has this perfect relationship with the Father, and whenever he prays, the Father listens. So he says, "I'm praying for you. Okay, you're done. Now I know you're going to turn back. When you turn back, strengthen your brothers." That prayer goes straight to the Father. And that's also why Jesus doesn't say, "Satan has you." Okay, Jesus is saying, "Satan demanded to have you." There's a very, very big difference there too. It's not that Satan has us. Satan has to request for us. Satan has to ask for permission. If you're familiar with the book of Job, there's a story in which Satan does the same thing with Job. He doesn't just tempt Job because he can, right? He goes to God first, and then he asks God for permission to do stuff with Job. And that's the same thing. And so some of us, we might have this idea of, Satan and God, they're having this big cosmic tug of war going on in heaven, and all of history is just holding its breath, and we're just waiting to find out who's going to win. Is it Satan or is it God? And it seems like a close match. But here, if you look at the Bible, it's actually not a close match at all. It's not like the Super Bowl where the best of the best go against each other. It's like the Ravens taking on a bunch of kindergartners. That's really how it is. Okay? That's really how it is. God is in full control, and every time Satan has to do anything, he has to ask for permission. Right? In the same way, if the Ravens were to play the kindergartners, right? Sometimes, okay, let's give you, okay, you failed on your 4th down, okay, let's give you maybe 5 more downs so you can have a few more tries just because we feel bad for you, right? That's really kind of how it is. Notice also that Satan is demanding for the disciples, and Jesus is demanding on the disciples. And we'll soon see that God chooses to grant Jesus' prayer over Satan's demand. And there's a valuable lesson in that, because it means that there's nothing Satan can do that Jesus cannot overcome. There's nothing Satan can do that Jesus cannot overcome. It's like that old Gatorade commercial. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where Michael Jordan and Mia Hamm, they're playing tennis and random things, and Mia Hamm, she's always saying, anything you can do, I can do better, right? And of course, I don't know if she can play basketball better than Michael Jordan, but it's a commercial. But in this scenario, right, when we're talking about God and Satan, actually, Jesus can do anything better than Satan. That's a reality. And so when we are tempted, we just need to remember, in those moments, God is in full control. And because He is in full control, not partial control, God has the final say, and that's why we have hope. But let's go back to Peter real quick, because let's focus on him. I think there's a lot to learn about Peter. Let's put ourselves in his shoes. Earlier we talked about how Satan is out to demand everybody, and now Jesus is turning his attention to Peter, and now Jesus is using the singular you. He's not talking to everybody. He's just talking to Peter, and he tells Peter, I am praying for you that your faith will not fail. And I can imagine, if I was Peter, I'd probably be thinking, why is he turning his attention to me right now? Am I going to be the one who will betray Jesus? He just mentioned someone's going to betray him at this table. Am I going to be that one? And then so Peter, he immediately defends himself. Of course not. That's not me. Jesus, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death. And I wonder, have you been there? Because I have, right? There are these moments I have when I'm on this emotional high, and I might be at a retreat somewhere, or I was baptized about 10 years ago, and I remember feeling that when I was baptized, and I go, God, everything I have is yours. I will fight until I have nothing left. I will not let you down. No matter what the world does to me, I'll stay with you till the end. I say those things to God. But what is Jesus' response? He says, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny 3 times that you know me. And I don't know about you. I've never, ever seen a rooster in my life, okay? And so if Jesus said this to me, this probably wouldn't mean too much to me. And I go, okay, that probably means I'll be pretty good. But not in this context. And people back here, they saw roosters all the time. And the roosters, they crowed every single morning. So in other words, Jesus was saying, you think you're going to go with me to prison and to death? You're not even going to last 24 hours. So that's called a comeback, right? So let's fast forward a little bit, okay? Jesus is arrested. We'll read through that. And then we won't read through that because it's for the sake of time. But let's go to verse 54. And this is talking about, this is right after Jesus is arrested. It says, then they seized him and led him away, bring him into the high priest's house. This is Jesus talking about, right? And Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, this man also was with him. But he denied it, saying, woman, I do not know him. And a little later someone else saw him and said, you also are one of them. But Peter said, man, I am not. And after an interval of about an hour still, another insisted, saying, certainly this man also was with him, for he too is a Galilean. Peter crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. Have you been there in Peter's shoes? Maybe you're down at your worst when you realize deep down inside that you have failed. When you have maybe broken your promises. When maybe the very thing that you boasted about is the very thing you are now embarrassed about. And you feel it's not just that you let yourself down, but that you let God down. I don't know if you know me too well. If you don't know me too well, I'm married to Van Kim, or you can call her VK, and we're newlyweds, so we have a lot of issues. But I'm sure once we get into it, we won't have any issues anymore. So, but anyways, one of the things I struggle with is I fail to keep my word quite often to her, because one of the things I do is when people ask me something, I don't like to disappoint people, so I just give them I just spit out something that will make them feel good, that will make them feel satisfied with my answer without even thinking about it. Right? I just do that quite often, and sometimes it's a horrible habit. I would have this arrangement with her, like I was supposed to be home at a certain time, and she calls, and one, I forget that I made that arrangement, and two, I realize that I'm like an hour away for some reason doing some random thing, and I go, I'll be there in half an hour, and for some reason I also think that magically I'll be able to teleport. Well, I don't know why I think that, but that's what I say, because I don't want her to be upset at that moment. And then so I rush through everything, get my car, I zoom home, and then and sure enough, there's traffic. Okay, that always happens. And then I get home and she's upset. Or sometimes she's not upset, but sometimes she's upset. And in that moment, it feels so small, feels so trivial, but I feel like a failure. I feel like I let her down. I let her down again. But you know what's even worse than the feeling that I let her down for me is the feeling that I let God down. The feeling that I let God down. I don't know if you've been here. I don't need to name all of your sins or anything like that, but you can probably think of some examples in your own life. Maybe it's, man, I vowed a month ago that I wouldn't look at things on the internet that I shouldn't be looking at. It might be something like that. And I was doing so well for a month, but yesterday, I don't know what happened. It was just a bad day, or I don't know, but I did it again. Or maybe I feel like, I used to have this problem with anger, and, I feel like I was doing so well. I was just sharing with my community group last week, maybe about how I was doing so well. I felt this sense of calmness and peace, and just yesterday, I blew up at my kids again. Or whatever it is. I don't know what your issue or your addiction is, but I've definitely felt that way. When there are moments I feel like I had a victory, I thought it was a done deal, and then a week later, I feel like I'm in the same exact place where I was. And during those moments, I relate with Peter here. Right? Peter, he must have thought that, he followed Jesus around for 3 years. He must have felt like an awesome disciple. He was as close to Jesus as anybody could be. He probably, felt, and it was a genuine feeling. He wasn't lying. If Jesus was going to go to prison, he was going to go to prison with them. But then there's the scenario, he denies Jesus 3 times. And I feel like Peter during those times. And the only thing I really can do is to weep. And so here's a big question. Did Peter's faith fail? Did Peter's faith fail? Because Jesus prayed that Peter's faith wouldn't fail. And it seems like right here, Peter's faith failed pretty badly. It seemed like. So how can we reconcile that? And the answer is that the story doesn't end right here. Because the night that Jesus was arrested, in fact, 2 people, the Bible talks about 2 people who betrayed Jesus. One was Judas, and one was Peter. And and also, we show that Satan was out to get both of them. It says Satan entered into Judas, and then it says Satan demanded to have Peter, and then Jesus was praying for Peter. So we can follow these 2 people. If you don't know the story, Judas, he sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And when Judas found out that Jesus was condemned, he felt guilty. He threw the 30 pieces of silver down on the temple floor, and he ran out. And he was so convicted and ashamed, he hung himself. And that was really all we know of his story. But Peter's story goes on. A few days later, Peter heard that some of the women had witnessed the stone of Jesus' tomb rolled away. And then immediately when he found out, he sprinted to the tomb. And then a while later, he actually saw Jesus. And a while later, the disciples, they were fishing on the sea, in the Sea of Galilee, and they saw Jesus afar on the beach. And then Peter was like, "Is that Jesus right there?" And then immediately, he jumped into the lake and he swam to Jesus. And that's a very different reaction from Judas. And a few months later, Peter was actually one of the key leaders in the early church, and he often boldly proclaimed who Jesus was to others. And one of these times in Acts chapter 5, he was standing in front of the Jewish council, not too different from the way Jesus was standing before the Jewish council the day he died. And the high priest said to the apostles, "We strictly charge you not to teach in this name of Jesus. Yet here you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching, and you intend to bring this man's blood upon us." But Peter and the apostles answered, "We must obey God rather than men." So you see that just a few months before, Peter had run and hid, and he denied even knowing who Jesus was. And now, Peter was a different man. The Bible doesn't record how Peter dies, but the early church fathers, they do. They say that Peter was crucified upside down about 30 years after Jesus was crucified. And so now we can ask again, if we know all this information, did Peter's faith fail? And if we know the whole story, then our answer is confidently no. Peter's faith did not fail. Peter stuck it out to the end. And I think there's a very big difference between what you can call a failure of character and a failure of faith. A failure of character will come, right? It is inevitable. We will mess up. We will break our promises. We will let God down. That's part of our sinful nature. That will happen. And if you haven't felt what Peter felt when the rooster crowed, most likely you will feel that. If you stick out this journey of faith long enough, you will feel that at some point in your life. But after that character failure, after when you fail, that's when it matters. And then the question, the real test of faith is, will you run away from Jesus or will you run to Jesus? Will you run away from Jesus, sulking in your defeat like Judas did? Or will you run to Jesus the way Peter ran to the tomb, the way Peter swam to the shore? No, and he did that because Peter knew deep down inside that Jesus loved him still. And one of the biggest ways I think we can determine for ourselves, even, do we really understand the gospel, is by seeing what happens when we fail, when we sin. When we sin, do we run from Jesus or to Jesus? Another way to think about this is, after you have failed miserably, you have your character failure or moral failure, whatever, will your faith also fail? Because that's something different altogether. And if your faith fails, you show that your faith was dependent on your character. When your faith fails, you show that your faith was dependent on your morality. But if your faith doesn't fail, it shows that your faith was dependent on God. If your faith doesn't fail, it shows that your faith was always dependent on God, so that even if your character fails, your faith is still grounded. And many people do this. I do this sometimes. If we only come to Jesus when we are doing well, then it shows that we might not understand the gospel very well. The gospel says that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. In other words, Jesus didn't wait for us to patch ourselves up, to make ourselves a little better before he chose to die for us. He knew who we were. He saw all the brokenness and the ugliness inside and out, and then he chose to die for us, past, present, and future. And if we truly understand the gospel, then Jesus, he loves us no matter what, and it will be a joy to go to him, even in our failures. And these lustful habits or these suicidal tendencies or these drinking problems or these anger issues, all of your character flaws, right? Ultimately, it won't affect our ability to go to Jesus. Because again, our faith isn't dependent on those things. Our faith isn't dependent on our character. Our faith is dependent on God. One of the biggest lies that Satan has told today is that our character failures disqualify us. Our character failures disqualify us. If we have failed in one way or another, it means, Satan says, that our faith is lost. Right? And we hear this, right? We hear people say this. Maybe we've said it ourselves. We've said something like, I've made too many mistakes. I've messed up so much in the past. I can't go to church. I can't pray. I can't serve. I can't do anything because I failed too much. But the thing is, just because you've messed up bad doesn't mean God has messed up bad, right? And just because you've given up on yourself doesn't mean God has given up on you. Because the reality is your faith never depended on you. Your faith always depended on God. And though you might let yourself down, God will never let you down. In Satan's economy, right, you might feel like a failure, but in God's economy, there is no failure. Because you are his beloved child of God no matter what. And nothing, not even your own failures, will disqualify you. I just want to focus on one last thing that Jesus says to Peter, and in verse 32, Jesus says to Peter, when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. When you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. Isn't it interesting that even before Peter repented, even before Peter sinned, Jesus already tells him, you need to strengthen your brothers. Because I think there's a tendency in today's world when we think that we are struggling, we can't be strengthening our brothers. But the reality is Satan is out to get everybody. My fight isn't just my fight, and your fight isn't just your fight. We are all fighting together. We're not meant to be fighting Satan ourselves, so we need to be strengthening others because we are all being attacked. I think there's this huge tendency in today's church to isolate ourselves. Maybe we get so immersed in our self-centered way of thinking when we just think about us and our problems, and I think we shouldn't. We need to be concerned about other people. That's why even before Peter messed up, Jesus, he knows there is this tendency in human beings to just think about themselves. So he says, when you get better, when you come back to the faith, you need to strengthen other people. In John F. Kennedy's inaugural address in 1961, you might know this, he says, and so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And I think that is the same way we should think about our churches. I think we should be asking, ask not what your church can do for you, ask what you can do for your church. How can you be strengthening other people in your church? How can you be serving other people in your church? And again, one of Satan's lies is that our character failures have disqualified us from serving other people. You might say stuff like, oh, I can't help anybody. I have enough problems as it is. Or, I can't help anybody. What can I do? I have nothing to offer. I have so many issues as it is. I don't have anything to offer. But the life of Peter shows that it doesn't matter because Peter had loads of issues. If you track the Bible, he has arrogance issues. He has anger issues. He has even in Galatians, we see he has racism issues. He has all sorts of issues. So it doesn't matter if your life is immersed with problems. As long as you're following hard after Jesus, Jesus' call for us to follow him isn't just so that we can lessen our problems. It is, but Jesus also wants us to serve others. And I think the example of Peter shows us that God loves to use broken people to serve other broken people. Church isn't just a place where you can go and you can get your weekly fix. Church isn't just a place where you can go just so you can get some motivation. Church isn't just a place where you can, where people a few people who have things figured out, they look at everybody else who don't have things figured out and they try to figure their lives out. That's not church. Church is everybody doesn't have anything figured out, and Jesus does. Jesus has everything figured out. So we're constantly supporting each other. We're constantly pointing each other to Jesus. We're constantly telling each other, don't give up because Jesus is there and he wants you. And we got to encourage each other. Let's keep tapping into the power of the Spirit. Let's do everything we can to serve one another. And so I really want to ask you, how are you serving others in your church? How are you serving others in your community? How are you serving others in your families? Maybe some of you are sitting here and you're thinking, I know intellectually I got to serve others, but I just don't know how. I feel powerless. I feel so stressed already. I feel busy already. Or maybe some of you, you're not even there. You're not even thinking about service. You're still thinking about Peter, and you're thinking about, man, I feel like a failure. I feel like every day I'm up against this wall that I just can't climb. And I almost every day I go through these moments when I feel like my faith fails. And I'm just stuck in this cycle over and over. In the story of Peter, sometimes it just feels so foreign, so outside of myself. It seems so distant. How can I ever have this transformation that Peter experienced? And if you're there, I want you to know that ultimately it's okay. Ultimately it's okay because ultimately being a Christian isn't about what we do, but it's about what Jesus did. And I think one of the reasons why Peter was able to experience this transformation is because he was close to Jesus. And he knew Jesus. And he understood fully what Jesus had done for him. So if you're there, I want to invite you to simply reflect on what Jesus did. Moments after Jesus told Peter that Satan demanded to have him, that very night, Jesus turned himself in. The guards came to arrest him, and Peter even drew a sword, think he was going to fight them off. And Jesus could have called down his warrior angels to help. And again, it could have been like the ravens and the kindergartners, but he didn't. Jesus turned himself in. Do you see the irony here? So Satan demanded to have his disciples, to have Jesus' disciples, and Jesus said no. And what did Jesus do? He said, you can have me instead. Satan demanded to have the disciples, but Jesus gave Satan himself. And for the next 12 hours, Jesus endured hell like nobody ever endured it before. He endured the beating, he endured the mocking, the cursing, the accusing, and ultimately the nailing of his body on the cross. You see, Satan had asked for all of humanity, and God could have handed us over. But instead, God handed over his son, Jesus. And when he did, our debt was paid. One of my favorite movies is Man on Fire. Denzel Washington, I don't know if you've seen it. It came out about 10 years ago. And there's a scene, so Denzel Washington in this movie, he's trying to save this 9-year-old girl who's been kidnapped. And towards the end of the movie, he's on the phone with this head honcho kidnapper dude. And this guy tells Denzel Washington, I will give you a life for a life, her life for your life. And it's one of the most moving scenes I've ever seen. Denzel says yes, and he agrees, and they meet at this bridge, and he and the girl's mom meet the kidnappers, and the girl runs over to the mom, and Denzel, he's injured, and he slowly walks over to the kidnappers, and he surrenders. And that's what Jesus did with us. That's exactly what Jesus did with us. Satan demanded to have us, and Jesus gave Satan himself when he died on the cross. But 3 days later, something else happened. And that was that Jesus rose from the dead to show that Satan couldn't win. Satan couldn't keep Jesus down. And if you have pledged yourself to Jesus, then Satan can't keep you down either. Even during those moments when you wonder, whether it's inside or outside, when you're talking to yourself or you're talking to people talking out loud or whatever, and when you wonder, is my faith worth anything? How come I'm not experiencing transformation? Why do I keep failing? And you're wondering, will my faith fail? You can know that even though we fail over and over, Jesus never failed. And that's all that matters. Jesus didn't fail, and because Jesus didn't fail, our faith won't fail. Because again, our faith wasn't dependent on our character, on what we do. Our faith is always dependent on what God has done. And our faith is alive because Jesus is alive. So I pray that life and message of Jesus will give you hope. I want to ask the worship team to come up, and let's just pray real quick to close off. Father, I thank you so much that you sent your son Jesus down to live a perfect life, to experience the pain we experience, to suffer the suffering we suffer through, and to die ultimately. Thank you that even though we fail over and over, you never failed. And that our hope doesn't rest on what we do, on our performance or activity or morality or character. It doesn't rest on any of that, but it rests solely on you. And that you never let us down. And thank you also that even now, we talked about this last week, that the Spirit is interceding for us. The Spirit is interpreting our prayers. And that even when we don't know what to pray, even though we feel desperate and alone and rejected, and we feel like failures left and right over and over, that you're still praying for us. And in the same way that Jesus prayed for Peter and that prayer was answered, we can have confidence that that prayer is going to be answered and that our faith won't fail. God, I pray that throughout this week you remind us over and over of that reality. When we go through those moments and they'll come, God, those moments when we do mess up, the very thing we were proud about, the very thing we were boasting about becomes the thing we're embarrassed about. And we don't want to tell anybody. We just want to close in on ourselves. I pray that you remind us of how much you love us still. And that you give us the courage and the boldness to reach out, to talk to somebody, but ultimately to come to you. Please remind us we always have the freedom to run to you no matter how desperate things get. The way Peter ran to you. Thank you so much, and I pray this on your son's name. Amen.